Right, what's happening, guys? So in case you missed it, Jose Mourinho had a right pop at Englishman Anthony Taylor in the car park of the Puskás Arena in Budapest, following Roma's penalty shootout defeat to Europa League specialist Sevilla, as showcased by the following clip.
It's a fucking disgrace, man. It's a fucking disgrace, man. Ni Rossetti è stato capace di dire che non è. Ni tu sei stato capace. Fucking proofs, man.
Now, it's always a right laugh to see shit go down in football, and one can't help but get their popcorn out when things like this take place. However, I've got to be honest here, Mourinho's had a bloody nightmare, and this meltdown stems entirely from the fact that his overinflated ego is badly bruised, and that's coming from someone who's actually quite a big fan of the man, and has nothing but respect for his achievements. Let me explain why. First and foremost, he threw all his eggs into the Europa League basket. Premier League viewers will remember him doing the same with Man United in the 2016-17 season, and while it paid off on that occasion, it has spectacularly backfired in this one. That's always going to be a risk you run in cup competitions where fine margins so often decide the final result, just like they did last night. And the best Roma can hope for now is qualification to the Europa League, and even that's not a guarantee going into the final day of the Serie A campaign, with Juventus breathing down their necks. A few weeks ago, Mourinho stated the following on qualifying for the Champions League. It's like Jesus Christ coming to Rome and going for a trip to the Vatican. Aside from conveniently forgetting the year when the board invested more than 100 million euros in his team, he's trying to pull the wool over supporters' eyes. And, unfortunately, many fall into this trap hook, line and sinker. While there's no getting away from the fact that making back-to-back European finals is a fine achievement, it's no good pretending that Roma are some sort of minuscule club who weren't quite literally playing in a Champions League semi-final themselves a couple of seasons back. Not to mention teams like Atalanta and Lazio are above them in the table with shoestring budgets of their own. Secondly, Mourinho's concern about his own reputation within the footballing world. It wasn't so long ago that him and Pep were locking horns with the two biggest clubs on the planet, and while the latter continues to dominate the sport in a manner we've seldom seen before, the former constantly gets accused of being a has-been whose tactics are now archaic in the modern day game. Although I don't necessarily agree with that assessment, it does have some legs to it. But Mourinho and his fanboys always rightly point out that Pep's never built up a club from the ground up or won trophies with unfancied teams. So this was a huge opportunity missed to keep that narrative going, all while the Spaniard is closing in on a historic treble in the toughest competitions imaginable. For a fierce competitor and serial winner like Mourinho, this is obviously a bitter pill to swallow, and I've no doubt whatsoever that his inability to come to terms with reality is another key reason behind his post-match rant. As far as I'm concerned, Mourinho's CV means he'll always be amongst the greatest managers the world has ever seen, but not quite in the top one or two like he seemed destined to be in the decade between 2004 and 2014. Lastly, and perhaps most importantly, the game against Sevilla itself. I watched it from first minute to last, and honestly speaking, there wasn't anything close to the type of scandalous refereeing that's being suggested. While there was a contentious handball shot which could have gone Roma's way, things like that happen pretty much week in, week out, and no one really knows what the fuck the handball rule is these days anyways. The inconsistency in decision making is infuriating to say the least, but that's a problem which supporters of every single club bar none have faced in the past 12 months, and will continue to be the case until there's more clarity surrounding the rule book. From Anthony Taylor's perspective, it was an incredibly difficult game to manage. You've got two shithouse teams who've mastered the dark arts and were willing to go to any length in order to gain the most minute of advantages. So it should come as no surprise that several yellow cards were brandished out. For all these suggestions of Spanish bias, let's not forget that 6 Sevilla players were booked as well, and thus both teams have to take responsibility for turning this showpiece event into a scrappy affair. Mourinho even had the gall to come out and say, "We felt pressure against a team that has more talent than us." Sorry lads, but I'm just not having that. Sevilla are obviously a very good side, but that comes down to how they work together as a unit rather than outright individual quality. And for Mourinho to suggest otherwise is just more of him protecting his own interests and making it seem like his team were massive underdogs prior to kickoff, which couldn't be further from the truth. If you look at the balance of play, Roma were by far the better side in the first half, while the same was true for Sevilla in the second. Both teams had opportunities to win it in extra time, but overall, you'd have to say penalties was a fair outcome, and the Spaniards held their nerve much better at the final hurdle and deserve nothing but credit for it. Unfortunately though, all the chatter has been about officiating as opposed to Sevilla somehow winning this trophy yet again, despite being threatened with relegation for large parts of the season. What struck with me is Roma only having 36% possession over 120 minutes, which just goes to show you Mourinho is much better suited to being in charge of clubs who consider themselves to be plucky underdogs these days, because this simply wouldn't be accepted at places where winning silverware is an expectation. And thus the PSG links simply don't add up in my mind, and is a disaster waiting to happen if it does go through. As always, I'd love to hear your thoughts down below, and I'll catch you in the next one, folks. Peace.